welcome to this week's Riks Round Up by Riks Europe. My name is Hannah, and the panel today is Elias Nordgren and Peter Klipp. Welcome back.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Topics of today: COP30 exposes deep global split as Brazil summit ends without fossil fuel. We will talk about that. Secondly, we will talk about the Vilnius airport that is shut due to smuggling balloons. And lastly, we will talk about Trump that pushes peace plan for Ukraine, but the EU submits its own plan. Can you please help us out here with the first topic?
Yes, so the COP30, the climate summit meetings that were held in Belém in Brazil ended on November 22nd, so just lasting just under 2 weeks there. And the ambition here was obviously by the nations that were attending this, that they would reach a climate accord of some sort where they would agree we would phase out fossil fuels globally under some preconditions, I suppose. I mean, so obviously that point alone obviously failed because there was no such deal reached at this COP meeting, which that's not really out of the ordinary for these types of global summits, obviously. And there are so many scandals connected to these climate meetings that you have to wonder like what actually is in the future for these types of global climate accords as we've been seeing. The climate researcher Björn Lomborg, who belongs to one of the he's a skeptical researcher. He's opposed to the current state of research that is regarding climate change. He's pointed out some very alarming flaws in here with respects to how these meetings are conducted. And one of them is that China, for example, obviously by this point a very rich nation, a very industrialized nation, a nation that is leading in technology on many fronts, it still wants to be considered a developing nation for the sake of essentially being not having a lot of demands placed on it for the sake of climate change. So that means they don't have to deindustrialize, while Europe and the Americas, well, at least the United States and Canada, I suppose, will have to do that. And this is basically just boiling down at this point to some sort of like anti-Western climate reparations or climate compensation scheme. And we've seen this pattern on previous COP meetings as well, where a lot of third world countries are essentially using this forum as a way to extort many Western nations, to essentially force Western taxpayers to fund climate development in many of these countries, such as building dams, such as making sure people are not as vulnerable in countries such as Pakistan or Bangladesh to floods and things like that. So my takeaway from this whole thing, still regarding the fact that they failed to meet any type of like common ground at this meeting, is that the absurdities of these climate summits have reached a point where I don't think most countries are even like wholeheartedly in this anymore. I mean, we saw this actually at the meeting where the King of Sweden, who was one of the representatives of Sweden, he called into question this whole idea that the West has to pay for essentially has to pay climate reparations to the rest of the world for the history of industrialization or whatever. So there are a lot of things coming to a head right now with regards to just how absurd the COP meetings are in general, and it definitely puts a lot of question marks on the future of this type of global summits.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is also, why hold it in Brazil? I mean, last year they held it in Baku, which is some kind of a petrostate. The group of negotiators that is hostile to fossil fuels. That was sort of weird already. And this year they held it in sort of what is, I think, the global symbol for environmental concerns, which is the Amazon rainforest in Belém, a city just next to it. They had to destroy part of the rainforest to construct a new highway. I mean, you cannot make it up. And Brazil is an agricultural powerhouse, and itself, there's nothing wrong with it. Sustainable agriculture is absolutely possible. And one of their biggest crops is soy cultivation. Now, for years, I think more than 15 years, there's been the Amazon soy moratorium, which was a voluntary agreement between farmers, NGOs, and everybody involved to sort of make sure there's not excessive damage to the environment when cultivating soy. Now, just before the COP summit at the end of August, the authorities in Brazil decided to suspend this moratorium. So, like, then we haven't even discussed, you know, the corruption issues of the president, the socialist president of Brazil, and the many other problems. And what we hear there is talk about reparation payments. So, like, there's so many double standards, and that's why Elias, like you say, people like Björn Lomborg, they basically call to just stop this climate circus and take a completely different approach. No longer central planning and taxing, but relying on innovation to solve environmental problems.
Yeah, so all of those hypocrisies that you mentioned, and also the fact that, you know, Europeans are paying the price for this. Their lives are becoming more expensive. Obviously, we're deindustrializing Europe, all part of this, you know, climate plan to get rid of carbon emissions, essentially. And, you know, people can only stomach this ridiculous these ridiculous demands from a global elite for so long. So, well.
Yes, let's get into the second topic. The Vilnius airport has once again shut. Why this time?
Well, Hannah, due to balloons. And the Lithuanian government has even declared this to be a hybrid attack, supposedly from Russia or its pet state, Belarus. So what's happening is that you have illegal smuggling happening through, indeed, balloons that can contain up to 60,000 you know, illegally produced cigarettes that are, I'm sure, dangerous to health. You know, that's always when it you know, what happens when you have these shady criminals producing them, and they have small GPS tags attached to them. So these balloons just go anywhere, and then sort of the criminals in Lithuania can then find them back with the help of these GPS tags. Some of them have also flown into Latvia. According to the latest report, for a while things were slightly better. The Lithuanian government has protested, has said, look, this is unacceptable. And in response, the Belarusian authorities no longer allow Lithuanian truck drivers from leaving Belarus. And this concludes that for the Lithuanian government, this you know, makes it evident that the, you know, Belarusian regime is in bed with these criminals, that these are not just, you know, private criminals completely unrelated to the government doing these kind of things, that it's the Belarusian authorities, and therefore obviously also Russia, because these kind of, you know, destabilization actions of NATO countries will never happen if Russia is also not giving its okay, or probably Russia may be behind ordering them. We don't know. It just shows that sort of the shaky European border for migration, but also for goods smuggling, that it remains a European weakness that our adversaries can exploit.
I would like to add something to that, and I actually think that these balloon incidents actually somehow prove that the European border defense along the eastern border of the European Union is actually quite rigid and quite solid. Because I mean, these are the smuggling goods into a different country with balloons. That is something you would see between North and South Korea historically. They would smuggle illegal goods into North Korea, such as movies and various Western products in there through balloons, and basically airdropping them. And the fact that Belarus has to resort to this to even actually get these contraband products into Lithuania and other countries just shows that there is really no other way to really smuggle these items in there. So that's, you know, that's a bit a positive side of things. But as you were talking about there, Peter, I mean, this is obviously a destabilization effort by the Belarusian government, eventually also by the Russian government, and it just sort of shows how this they're sort of like instrumentalizing this criminality that exists that wants to sell contraband cigarettes, for example, or other products into their wider like geopolitical goals, so to speak. I mean, like a few balloons isn't really going to do that much of a geopolitical impact, obviously, but it affects the countries, and it affects the relationship between them at the very least. So it's very interesting how they're utilizing these criminal elements to to accelerate to escalate, actually, I suppose, the hostile tensions between the European Union and Russia and Belarus.
And Trump pushes a peace plan for Ukraine, but the EU submits its own plan. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, so the 28-point plan that Donald Trump submitted a few weeks ago, that received quite a lot of negative attention in Europe. Many people believe that these terms were way too harsh on Ukraine and way too conciliatory towards Russia, and so for various reasons. Obviously, also that the EU needs to present its own alternatives. They can't just rely on American influence at all times. They also presented on a plan of their own, which is largely actually Donald Trump's plan, but with some modifications. So this is just a very like shallow attempt to show that the European Union actually has a leg to stand on in these types of negotiations. But what is actually surprising to me is that most of the points, I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a lot of complexities there, but most of them are quite conciliatory to Russia in a way that I wouldn't really expect Europe to actually have this type of like mending attitude towards Russia after all of these, after the fact that this war has gone on for so many years, and you've had such a harsh rhetoric between Europe and Russia for quite a long time. So you have, for example, one point is the reintegration of Russia into the global economy. I mean, that sounds very like constructive and not really something that the EU is really. That's not the type of rhetoric that the EU uses at this point in time, is my experience at the very least. They also promote dialogue and de-escalation, and they will also concede that Ukraine is not going to become a NATO member, practically at least. So that's a surprising actually concession by the EU as this stands. If this actually is the plan that they want to bring to the table with negotiations against Russia. There are some more aggressive stances in there. However, for example, that the fact that Russian assets will be used to compensate Ukraine and help reconstruct Ukraine. That is a very contentious issue, obviously, and that's something that it's probably the most polemic and most hostile of the points in this peace treaty. This draft, as far as I've seen.
Yeah, I'm personally a little bit skeptical about the whole thing. I mean, on the one hand, it's absolutely great that President Trump tries with all his might to create peace over there. But let's be honest, so far he has been just as badly failing as everybody before him. He's trying to be the good cop with Russia, that fails. He's trying to be the bad cop with Russia, that fails. The sanctions fail. The Trump sanctions fail. They continue to sell oil and gas, indirectly, of course. And, it looks like at the end of the day, Putin will have to change his mind, as long as he doesn't really want peace. Even if Trump would offer him Kiev, which would be crazy and unacceptable, obviously. But even then, I wouldn't be surprised if Putin says, "Look, no, thank you. I prefer to continue with the war, because ultimately, what matters for Putin is that he has some foreign conflict that he can exploit to divert attention." Also, imagine if Russia now, stops with the war. Throughout Russian history, every time the Tsar lost the war, this didn't end very well for the Tsar. And the same fate is likely for Putin if he would stop now. So that's the tragedy of the whole thing. He sort of has to, double down. So look, if I'm wrong and Putin settles, at least for a while, good. But if not, then I don't think we have any other chance than to continue to, support Ukraine, ideally not by expropriating Russian assets, that is the unintelligent way, but by simply paying for it, and at the same time avoiding that we end up in a direct conflict with the Russians.
I essentially see this as a war of attrition already. I mean, this war's been going on for so long, and to be honest, we haven't really seen that many things change over the past few years, over the past few months at the very least. So my view of this is that all of these proposals to end the war that are arising every few months, they always end up in nothing. It's always a big nothing burger, and I expect that this war is actually going to be lasting as long as Russia can potentially, afford to actually drive this war. The same actually goes for Europe as well. I think we're going to be locked in this conflict for a very long time, and it's going to be very difficult for anyone to actually invent some types of peace terms that is going to be agreeable by everybody, because everybody will be seen as the loser if they have to concede something. Both Russia and Europe has staked so much on this war that they have to win this war that it's very difficult for them to actually walk back on some of their demands, both of which, both sides are acting increasingly, have been acting at least increasingly ridiculous throughout this conflict, obviously. And we'll see if Donald Trump can actually make a nudge on that at all. I'm not very hopeful, however.
And that was this week's Riks Roundup. So thank you, Peter and Elias, for your insights.
Thank you,
Thank
Hannah.
you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.